Thank you. It's an enormous honor for me to be asked to speak to the Assembly of First Nations gathering today. And I want to start by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Mohawk, of Kanien'kehá:ka, of the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse. It is an honor to be here with you today. Yesterday, I wasn't with you because I was at the 39th annual gathering of the BC Elders in the territory of the Wasanich people, which I have the honor to represent in Parliament. There are 4 First Nations within the territory of Saanich and the Gulf Islands that I represent in Parliament: the Sault, the Sekum, the Tsartlip, and the Pocatchen. And I raise my hands to all of you in the tradition I've now learned of honor and thanks and sayhashka for allowing me to be here, for allowing me to have a voice and to speak as my colleagues and friends have spoken to you already. I sometimes bring my daughter with me to Parliament, and every time I want to introduce her to somebody else that I work with, and given that there's only one other Green MP, most of the people I want to introduce to my daughter are in other parties. And I sort of drag her along and say, "Oh, sweetheart, there's a friend of mine from work." This is how I identify my friends who are in the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, the New Democratic Party. I have friends from work, the Bloc. We're friends. That's something that doesn't come across all that well outside of when I drag my daughter to meet my friends. But I know that my friends Tom Mulcair and Justin Trudeau were here yesterday. And from what I've seen, they had very good words. And I am pleased that they are willing to do what I am committed to do in this next election campaign, which is to make sure that the issues that matter to the First Nations of Canada are not ignored in the election campaign. I'm very heartened to see this video, but I'll come back to that. What I was shocked to see about what occurred yesterday when I was not here was that in less than, we're just 1 month from, just a month and a few days from when the report of the Commission on Truth and Reconciliation was tabled and given to the Governor General at Rideau Hall in a very moving ceremony that I was privileged to attend. It's been less than 6 weeks. And I think it's an absolute scandal that the Prime Minister of Canada nor the Minister responsible, Bernard Belcourt, could find time to be here with you. I think that Canadians from coast to coast will find that in a time that we have been challenged as non-Indigenous people to respond to the devastating words and findings of the report on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that the party that's currently in office has not seen fit to provide a speaker or someone to be accountable for their actions. Now, just before the end of the session in June, and I have to say that I'm looking around the room to see if I see Chief Bill Erasmus here, but I happened to see Chief Erasmus in British Columbia, and he said to me, "By the way, you know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report has only been tabled at Rideau Hall, and we need it to be tabled in Parliament. Can you get that done?" So I said, "Well, I'll try." And I'm very pleased to tell you that I was able to work this through the parliamentary process so that just before adjournment at the end of June, the findings and the testimony of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I did manage to get it tabled and accepted in Parliament as a document before us as parliamentarians. That's something that was obvious, but I'm indebted to Bill Erasmus for telling me to do it. Just make a note to yourselves that if you ask me to do something, thank you. So let me echo the words of my colleagues who've already spoken to you here, but certainly I think the Green Party wants to acknowledge and accept that we would, in a parliament, which we believe will be a more cooperative parliament with a minority, Greens are fully committed to implementing the recommendations of the Commission on Truth and Reconciliation that apply to the federal level. This is a priority. And it, of course, includes what we have long called for, an inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Goes beyond things that we've talked about before. We need, and this is, again, a searing scandal that has now brought us into international disrepute. Oh, there's a friend of mine from work. There's Carolyn Bennett. Hi, Carolyn. We're all friends. See, an election will make it nasty, but honest to God, these are lovely people I work with. Now, we need to do more than the inquiry. We need to find justice for the families of all of those missing aunties and sisters and little girls. Wherever they were lost, we need to find out what happened, and we need to create justice, and we need to ensure that the trend lines change. And that's the challenge of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It also challenges us to protect First Nations languages and to actually take steps to ensure that languages don't die. Because when language dies, culture dies, and that's the truth of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is that this was cultural genocide. And cultural genocide is when you kill off a language and you kill off a culture. And the peoples of my traditions, being that I'm not Indigenous, I can't tell you how much grief and sorrow it has visited on me to realize how much worse the residential school system was than I thought it was. I knew it was really bad because my friend Shirley Christmas, who is a Mi'kmaq poet and a good friend from Cape Breton Island, she told me what it was like for her and her little sisters when they were in residential school. So I thought I knew how bad it was, and it was so much worse because of how many generations this torture was visited upon. So we need to take it as a priority for all of us, First Nations and non-First Nations, that we move on a path of reconciliation. So how do we do that? Another thing we must do is accept and implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. But more than that, we have to change the way we make decisions in Canada. Now, to change our federation and the way we make decisions requires opening up the Constitution and so on. But Green Party wants to put forward an idea, and I think it's an idea whose time has come, and I hope other parties will take this up too. We believe that what we need to do is create something modeled on what Australia has done, called a Council of Canadian Governments. Australia, of course, calls it the Council of Australian Governments. And they've expanded the table. So there's the Prime Minister, so there's the federal government. There's the, in Australian context, the state government. So for us, the provinces and territories. And they created seats at the table for local governments, municipalities, big and small, but a small representative group of local government. What Greens want to do is expand that table. So the Council of Canadian Governments that meets with the same kind of importance that used to occur with the meeting of First Ministers, since Stephen Harper stopped meeting with First Ministers, but some of us have memories, we remember those meetings. There should be a seat at the table of the Council of Canadian Governments for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Then we can make decisions as a nation with a different kind of relationship, nation to nation, with respect, together around the same table. And then we can start putting things right, which includes the obvious things some of my colleagues have already mentioned, removing the 2% funding cap, paying attention to the urgent need for housing and education and clean drinking water and health care, at least as good as that any non-Indigenous person in this country is entitled to. Every First Nations community and First Nations people living in urban areas, all of the injustices and poverty and cycles of abuse must end, but we don't do that until we see each other in partnership, nation to nation. One of the other things that I can't wait to do when the new Parliament resumes, and I hope to convince everyone involved in the new Parliament, I was the first member of Parliament and the first party leader to condemn Bill C-51, the so-called Anti-Terrorism Act. It's not a piece of legislation that belongs in any democracy. It's a dangerous, anti-democratic piece of legislation, and there's nothing good in it to save. It must be repealed in its entirety. That's something that is a priority in the next Parliament. When we talk about First Nations issues, and this is something that happens in politics, it's almost as if it's a policy area. You sort of check off that box. That's not the way we should be discussing this now. One of the things we need to do is start recognizing, which I was seeing yesterday so clearly at the BC Elders Gathering, what non-Indigenous people must start learning from First Nations people. The respect shown to elders, the love shown to elders, the care and concern for children, and the willingness at the tribal school and Saut community. And the children were up on stage yesterday singing. And it was translated for us because it's a little song that was written for them by their teachers, and they sing it every morning. And it translates, the ocean is sacred, wild salmon are sacred, our forests are sacred, and they sing it every morning. I wonder what kind of parliament we would have if that was a song we sang every morning. We have a culture, an impoverished culture of non-Indigenous Canadians that has left out any room for the sacred. We have a culture that has no longer values our elders, our children, or is willing to show in a day-to-day way that every single person matters and every single person is respected. And as I saw the volunteers yesterday bringing food to the elders, everyone else could line up for food, but an elder could sit and put their hand up, sure enough. Respect and love and care and concern. Those are some things that non-Indigenous Canadians need to learn, but there's more than that. I was there yesterday with one of my heroes, Grand Chief Stewart Phillip of the British Columbia Indian Chiefs leader, Stewart Phillip, who stood on the line blockading Kinder Morgan. These acts of leadership are there for all Canadians to see and inspire us daily. We have challenges in this country, and part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process is to speak a truth that says, actually, Canada's in a fair bit of trouble right now, and we need First Nations leadership. We need to acknowledge it. We need to thank you constantly. I need to thank the people of Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy, and Maliseet First Nations who are standing up to protect the Gulf of St. Lawrence when nobody else is. Walalan, thank you to the Mi'kmaq for trying to stop oil and gas in a place where oil and gas has no place. And thank you to the Alberta Mikisew for raising an alarm with the United Nations of what's happening in Wood Buffalo National Park. And thank you to so many First Nations that are the first on the line, first to call out and say, this place is sacred, this place is not a place to put a risky pipeline full of bitumen. This is not a place, as the Haida Nation says, to put oil tankers on our coastline. This is not a place that we will sacrifice, whether Tsleil-Waututh or Haida or Nuu-Chulnjuth. There's leadership that non-Indigenous people need to say more frequently. Thank you, and when you stand on the line, we must stand with you in solidarity. We must be willing to put ourselves in the same place. And when you go to court, we must be willing to fundraise for those court cases. The Hupakosset First Nation, a tiny First Nation of 300 people near Port Alberni, was the only body in this country that went to court to try to stop the Canada-China Investment Treaty. I'm deeply honored that Brenda Sayers, who took that case on behalf of her chief and counsel through the courts in this country, is now standing as a candidate for the Green Party in North Island, Powell River. But when you look at the court cases, and thank you, the Chilcotin, thank you for fighting what was at the time a skirmish over a forest license and the perseverance to take it all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. So we get really clear words from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada in unanimous decision that title is title is title. It's long since passed to say meaningful consultation, Section 35. Yes, meaningful consultation, Section 35 is all true. But we're now in a different landscape where title is title is title. And those of us who are not Indigenous, not First Nations, not Métis, not Inuit, want to be in a partnership where we work to protect our own children through your leadership. Because our leadership has failed us by deciding that there isn't a pipeline that shouldn't be built. There isn't a mine that shouldn't be dug. So we're not a party against development, I need to say that. We're not a party against having an economy. We need a strong economy, we need the jobs, we need to create through sustainable activities the kind of prosperous Canada that looks after all of us, that puts as a primary value the collective commitment of compassion that in the 1960s led this country to have universal health care when our neighbor to the south never would. There's a lot about Canada, there's a lot about who we are that has drawn on the values and the principles and consensus-based decision-making and respect that we should have learned by now from First Nations. But I close because I want to leave a lot of time for you to ask me questions about what the Green Party would do and how we would do it and how we would go at these matters. I stand before you as someone who is deeply honored to be invited here. I know that the efforts of First Nations across this country never speak with one voice. How could you? Hundreds of different nations, thousands of different communities, different perspectives, different languages. But as honestly and as candidly as I can, let me say that Canada has no future as a healthy country unless we address the real challenge of healing. And that's a challenge that we can only do together, only by acknowledging that cultural genocide took place, only by acknowledging that the parts of your culture and your perseverance in hanging on to culture and to awareness of this place, Turtle Island, is what we need for healing in our culture. We are together in this struggle for healing and reconciliation. And we know that words like respect are critical. Words like partnership are critical. But I will say that the word that we need more than anything in a healing process is love. We need to acknowledge in this country that we have violated the most foundational bonds of love between mother and child, to steal children away and then to put those children through such suffering and then to visit it on the next generation when that child is a mother or father and the child is taken away again. These are not small crimes, and they're not going to be easy to overcome. But the bravery of those who first spoke the truth, people like Phil Fontaine, the bravery of people who first spoke the truth has led us now to where we are together on a shared commitment, at least from the candidates and the people of the Green Party of Canada. We want to be the voice that helps the most to put us on the right path. We want to be the listening ear that when you tell us something needs to be done and something needs to be different, that we hear you and we do our best. We want to work with you because this country needs all of us to put us on a path to healing, one to the other, and humanity to creation. Together, I know we can ensure the protection of sacred creation, the health and prosperity of community, and a future for all our children. That's the one we most cherish, the one we most want. A lot of us are grandparents in this room. Some are great-grandparents. I raise my hands to you as elders, and I tell you from the bottom of my heart that there's nothing we can't do when we put ourselves out there in a spirit of love, forgiveness, and healing. Thank you.